Welcome today. Today we're going over our mask mandate mayhem. If you have been paying attention over the past week, we've had a flurry of issues come up with this. So what we're doing is a briefing for our employers on these issues. My name's Mike Wong. My partner Carlos Arevalo will be doing this presentation with me today.
All right, and so we are here, and what are we talking about? We are talking about the mask update. As you all know, on May 13, 2021, the CDC issued new guidance with respect to fully vaccinated people, allowing the resumption of activities without having to wear masks or physically distancing. However, and there was an exception, wherever there's some required federal, state, local, tribal, or territorial laws, rules, and regulations, including local businesses and workplace guidance, that was the exception. So President Biden announced that we could essentially return to normal, back to normal and unmasked. But it's not that easy, right? And then on May 17th, OSHA updated its web page to state that working to update the guidance, and until then to refer to the CDC guidelines. So we have plenty of questions still, to go over, and that's what we will see what we could do today and go over some things with you. So Mike?
Perfect. So initial thoughts here. CDC's guidance for fully vaccinated individuals, it addresses masks, it addresses, essentially that anybody who's been fully vaccinated can now go without wearing a mask. But the problem is they really haven't provided any specific guidance for employers. In fact, if you go to the CDC's website, their specific guidance for employers, there's nothing that specifically addresses how fully vaccinated are addressed. It does address it with respect to time off and with how to address if somebody's fully vaccinated and is exposed, but it doesn't address for workplace guidance. In fact, OSHA is the same way. OSHA, essentially now says follow the CDC guidelines, and we'll be coming out with ours shortly. A lot of questions on this, and the simple answer is there's no one size fits all. This is going to be a case-by-case basis. Each employer or business is going to have to look at their circumstances and how they address it. In fact, it could be something where you're addressing it differently for employees than you are for individuals or the public or customers or clients who are coming into the businesses. Two most important things to keep in mind with these issues is, number one, your health, welfare, safety of your employees, patients, customers, suppliers, public, et cetera. How are you going to make sure you're showing that you're watching out for that? Two is, how do you operate your business effectively as possible? And, there's a third one we haven't really addressed or didn't list, but it's just general view in terms of your public relations. How do you address that? Finally, this is a huge thing that is going to be driven a lot by local and state mandates and guidance. Each state, after the announcement by the CDC, they've been constantly changing. For example, what we implement in an office in Indiana, Indianapolis, Indiana, is going to be very different from what we do at Chicago, or if we had Atlanta, Georgia. So each state is handling this different, and then even within those states, each locality is changing. And this is something changing hour to hour, day to day, week by week. So it is something we have to keep up to date on regularly.
Now, one thing that we can count on as not much of a change or not really changing is the definition of fully vaccinated. And what does that mean? And so individuals are going to be considered fully vaccinated 14 days after their final dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, the final dose is defined as the second dose of the two-dose vaccine, so that would be Pfizer or Moderna, or the first dose of the one-dose vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson. Further, to be fully vaccinated, an individual must have received a vaccine that has been approved by the World Health Organization for emergency use, right? And so the ones on top, Pfizer, Moderna, those count. as well as Johnson & Johnson. And as of May 13, 2021, you're looking at potentially the other ones, the AstraZeneca, Serum Institute of India, although they're not shipping anything out. The last time I'd heard, they're like keeping it in the country because of the issues they're having, and also Sinopharm. So that's essentially what you're looking at in terms of the vaccine.
So what are we talking about when we talk about the CDC guidance? You heard me kind of comment on it before. And the important thing to recognize is there's two different things here. There's one for non-healthcare settings, which I'm going to talk about, and then our next slide, Carlos, is going to go over healthcare settings. So in non-healthcare settings, fully vaccinated people, they can resume activities without wearing masks or physically distancing. So physically distancing is our social distancing, the 6 feet apart, except where required by federal, state, local, tribal, or territorial laws, rules, regulations, including local businesses and workplaces. So there's a bunch of exceptions, which we're going to go over here in a bit. But the other part that they do address is we can resume domestic travel, refrain from testing before or after travel, or self-quarantine after travel. We can refrain from testing before leaving the U.S. for international travel, refrain from self-quarantine, refrain from testing following a known exposure, if asymptomatic. That's a huge, huge difference. Is if they're not showing any symptoms, we don't have to follow the testing. If we do show symptoms, it is something that we would have to. So refrain from quarantine following known exposure if, again, without symptoms, asymptomatic. Refrain from routine screening testing if feasible. So that's really the only guidance we've gotten from the CDC when it comes for non-healthcare settings. Now, going over to the healthcare settings.
And with respect to healthcare settings, obviously, we have to keep in mind that that means the clinical settings. You know, so if the building where the hospital or whatever office is has a portion of it that is strictly corporate or administrative offices or any kind of other spaces where there's no delivery of health services, then those are separate. You're looking at those as non-healthcare settings. However, if we're dealing with areas where there's treatment being delivered, then that would be the health settings definition under CDC guidance. So in that situation, you still have to follow the infection prevention and control recommendations for unvaccinated individuals. So you're still doing the quarantine, the testing, all of those kinds of things. Now, in certain situations where both patients and the visitors are fully vaccinated, then you can have some close contact and not have to wear source control. By the way, source control, that's essentially just face covering or any mask covering your mouth and nose. For group activities and communal dining can resume without social distancing and source control. If fully vaccinated, you're almost moving into that area where you're not in a health delivery room, so that would apply. Now, healthcare personnel should continue to wear source control, your mask, while at work, but may dine and socialize in break rooms and meetings without source control or physical distancing. Again, those are non-clinical areas, so that's okay. Fully vaccinated healthcare personnel with high-risk exposures who do not have symptoms don't have to be restricted from work for 14 days following exposures. So that's your guidance in the healthcare setting.
Now, when we're talking about this issue, of course, the main thing that we want to look at is what are our potential legal issues, claims relating to face masks, social distancing when we get into this realm. And immediately the first thing that we have to, did I skip over? Yeah, I apologize. I skipped over a slide. So when we're looking at this, number one, OSHA. And I laugh about this because when President Biden made his initial announcement, OSHA hadn't come out with any guidance on face masks. And so when President Biden turns around and tells everybody at the White House staff that they can take off their masks, and they do, I kind of laugh and say, technically, the president may have just violated OSHA regulations by directing people to take off their masks. Something that's important to look at is OSHA is fining people on these issues. In fact, they said from the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020 through December 31st of 2020, OSHA issued almost $4 million in proposed penalties relating to COVID-19 issues. In fact, In April 27th of this year, a Naperville company was fined a little over $12,000 for not implementing safeguards. In that situation, what had happened was a number of employees had gotten together in a break room for a luncheon. Of those employees, 23 then tested positive for COVID-19 within the next 2 weeks. One of the employees actually passed away. And so OSHA came in and said, we're fining you based upon this sudden outbreak that occurred. Even more drastic is you look on April 13th, OSHA fined a tax preparation business, $136,000, over $136,000. And specifically there, what the business was doing was prohibiting employees and customers from wearing masks. So they're putting the OSHA came in and said by prohibiting employees, even if they wanted to wear a mask, you're saying they couldn't, and the employees were working within 6 feet of customers on a regular basis. So that's an extreme case, but I think you look at those and we still see a concern there for OSHA coming in, especially since we don't have specific guidance from them. Now, the other part to this is work comp claims. We've all been dealing with that over the past year. There are presumptions in place depending on the state. For example, Illinois was one where they put into a presumption that if the employee was at work or working within the workplace, that there was presumption that they got COVID-19 in the workplace. There were ways for us to rebut that presumption, but now with the mask coming off, there are still things that this is still something that we need to be aware of and concerned of. People will say, well, I've been fully vaccinated. The issue is individual who's been fully vaccinated can still contract and get COVID-19. The next thing that we get into is ADA reasonable accommodation claims. We've been dealing with this since the beginning of the mask mandates, somebody coming in and saying, hey, I can't wear a mask because of an ADA reasonable accommodation. We still have to be very aware of that. The other part is we have to look at the locality, and that's something we're going to address when we talk about the city of Chicago. They've issued some guidance and essentially said, okay, you can have a vaccination exception where you can open up even more, you can allow more things to occur, but you have to ensure that only fully vaccinated individuals are coming into your business. And in my mind, that does raise some potential ADA reasonable accommodation issues, because if somebody can't get the vaccine because of a disability or because of a religious belief, are you discriminating against them by not allowing them in because you're following the fully vaccinated? And it's going to be an interesting issue because city of Chicago is saying one thing, but then the federal government is saying another. So until we get some guidance from the EEOC, we do have to be careful there.
Another potential issue that we have to deal with is the enforcement of the policy that you may put into place. I'm sure that all of you have seen videos on YouTube or whatever other social media about fights taking place because people want to enforce the mask mandate, or somebody doesn't want to wear their mask, or there's just issues there. We have to be mindful that that kind of event has legal implications with respect to workers' compensation claims from employees who might potentially get beat up by trying to do something about somebody not wearing a mask. Similarly, if you have any bystander or any person that happens to get hurt in a fight, or whether you're dealing with patients or customers, whoever, that people from the outside, certainly there is a potential for that. Because of course, there's got to be due care in how you are enforcing your mask policy, and those are certainly issues that will come up if you have any incidents taking place because of the way in which this mask policy is being enforced.
Next is when we look at discrimination harassment claims. Again, it's making sure we are equally applying this. Again, I think this is potential if we start treating fully vaccinated versus unvaccinated differently. There's a potential claim for discrimination harassment, but as long as we are looking at it along those lines, and even when it comes to the ADA and religious accommodations, if you put into place certain things that that an individual with a disability or a religious belief can do to be able to comply or meet the requirement or meet the standard for being fully vaccinated, that is something that we can consider. That's not expressly stated in the City of Chicago guidance, but it is something from my view that we can do. In fact, working on incentive programs for vaccinations for employees. If you have a program, you do have to have some provision to accommodate individuals, either based upon a disability or religious belief. And so as long as we have additional steps, additional things that they have to comply with to be able to be equally treated under that, I think we'll be okay.
Next, we have the issues having to do with retaliation and whistleblower type protections. OSHA is going to enforce their whistleblower provisions. In depending on the situation, although mostly here what we're dealing with are probably Section 11 reporting, and so there's certain deadlines that come into play, but certainly when it comes to the retaliation issues, you have to keep in mind that taking any kind of adverse action because an employee, complains about, how the policy is being enforced or not enforced, any kind of firing, any kind of termination, any kind of discipline, those sorts of issues can result in a retaliation claim, and that just might make it even, create more of a problem than you need. So if anyone is exercising the rights in the statute to make sure that the place is safe and that you're not getting injured at work because of policies that are not being adhered to, certainly that is the kind of thing that you'll have, and you have to be careful about that. Just to give you an example here, as of May 23rd, there were over 5,000 complaints filed with respect to retaliation issues regarding COVID-19 matters. Mike?
Yeah, and that's a great point. In fact, the one other note I'll add on that is if anybody is implementing a vaccine policy, whether mandatory or incentive-based or voluntary even, if any of your employees complain about that or complain about any of your messaging, that could potentially fit them under this retaliation whistleblower for engaging in a protected activity. And so you need to be very careful about that and how you respond to that. And I typically say the best response is to acknowledge and recognize that, but just go back and say, we've made this decision based upon guidance from CDC as well as OSHA. Finally, the last one we're going to talk about is negligence and personal injury. This is an issue that kind of comes up from the customer clients, public, who are coming into your location, into your facility. If they get COVID-19, could they make a claim against you? And I think it depends. I think we're in a very gray area right now because before we could say, hey, we are following CDC and OSHA guidelines. If we change our face mask policy before CDC or OSHA comes out with more specific to workplaces, do we risk a potential claim? And I think you do. Even if your employees are fully vaccinated, there's still the potential that somebody, and I like to say, if you go to the plaintiff's bar, if they see an opportunity to make an allegation to bring somebody else into a claim like this, they're absolutely going to do it. And they're going to make it sound like the worst, that your company's procedures, policies, practices were the worst thing in the world, even if they weren't. But it means you're going to have to deal with it. So I think that is something that we have to look at as a potential area of being aware of and being careful with how we make our decisions on what to do. So the next thing we go in is state and local. This is we are going to address Illinois and City of Chicago just as we're based here, but it is something where you have to look at this. Each state is doing things differently, as we mentioned before. So on May 13th, there was an interim, in Illinois, there was an interim public health recommendation. It really essentially just mirrored the CDC's guidance. May 17th, Governor Pritzker issued an executive order, went through the phase order. What I liked about this was it was broader than the CDC guidance. It provided industry-specific guidance that the CDC and OSHA have not yet provided. On May 18th, the Illinois Department of Public Health also updated their COVID-19 facts to specifically address individuals of fully vaccinated.
Now, with respect to the city of Chicago, they also have issued certain guidance in reference to the new mask situation, and what they're doing is that the businesses, they're no longer required to mandate the customer wear masks. Okay, businesses are being encouraged, though not required, to verify that people are vaccinated if they don't wear masks. They're also being encouraged, though not required, to keep the mask policies in place, through at least through phase 5 in Illinois. So it just depends. Masks are still being required in health settings, like we talked about before, and schools, correctional areas, any kind of congregate settings, and public transportation, also in all city buildings in Chicago. So that's kind of what you're looking at generally. With respect to Chicago-specific guideline. And I know that Mike was going to talk about the vaccine exemption components of that.
Yeah. So one of the things we look at is the city of Chicago has created a vaccine exemption. So essentially, if a business can do three things is what the city of Chicago has said. Number one, they can stay as is, still require masks, and then they don't have to do anything. If they decide to have it, then there's two separate parts. They can make specific rules for those who are fully vaccinated and still allow individuals who are unvaccinated to come in. Then they have a third section, which is this vaccine exemption, which the vaccine exemption, City of Chicago has specifically said, if you have all of your employees are fully vaccinated and everybody that you allow to come into your business to be fully, require them to show proof, and you verify that they've been fully vaccinated, then you can change your regulations regarding face masks. You don't have to require face masks within your business. You can also work on different capacities, as well as they have extended hours as well. So as well as their other activities, for example, if you're a restaurant or a nightclub or a bar, you can reopen your dance floor and allow activities. They also have that. So let's say you don't want to do that on your day-to-day basis, but you have a wedding coming in. As long as everybody who's coming to the wedding and everybody who's working at the wedding have been fully vaccinated, you can also then have those more open guidelines there. So it's definitely something that's created kind of an incentive to push for all of your employees to be fully vaccinated, or at least everybody who's working on that night of an event to be fully vaccinated, as well as to require people coming in. For restaurants and bars, they've decided if you want to do the split thing, you have to figure out a way to identify that who's been fully vaccinated and who hasn't, whether that be a stamp on their hand, a different color wristband, some sort of way of identifying when they're fully vaccinated or not. So it is something that there are specific industry guidelines that have been broadened within the city for these compliance things.
Some additional specs that actually, I go back to, thanks, Mike. Some specific, if you were not going to take advantage of the vaccine exemption, you're still subject to the capacity specifications, and those might be different from place to place. So if you're, for instance, if you're looking at a non-customer facing office building, you have a 60% capacity. Retail, it would be 60%. If it's a gym, another example, that's also 60%, with classes of 50 indoors or 100 outdoors. Those are very specific capacity specifications that have been placed in Chicago, but those remain in place unless, of course, you're following the vaccine exemption that Mike was talking about.
And so, what are our potential changes? What can we consider? Number one, we absolutely can continue with the face mask policy. We can say all of our employees have to wear it. It's our workplace. We have that exception under the CDC and OSHA's guidance Can we change that? Can we say employees aren't required? Absolutely, we can do that. I think we just have to, when we're doing that, we got to make sure we understand what our potential risks, legal applications are, as well as looking at when we do make that change. When we make that change, make sure we're identifying what that, communicating that change to employees, as well as making sure employees understand the risks. Now, great question we've been asked a lot, Carlos, is can we ask employees if they've been vaccinated?
And certainly you can, but you have to be mindful that that's really the extent of what you could be asking. You don't want to get too deep into the issues because you might end up eliciting, health-related information and stepping into an ADA type of situation. So you can certainly, do a survey, find out who's getting vaccinated, who's not, so that you can plan, so that you can figure out how you may want to do things. Mike talked about, doing separate facilities, those kinds of things. It's good to know whether they are vaccinated. But beyond the one specific question, then that's where you might get into trouble because you're asking too much and you may end up eliciting other information, which then makes it more complicated for you to handle.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the EEOC is in their guidance specifically states that we can ask if somebody has been vaccinated or not. They say the concern on questions becomes if you're asking the questions that would need to be asked before they get the vaccine. So if you have a program to issue vaccines, employees are coming in and you're asking those questions on do they have pre-existing conditions that would create concern if they get the vaccine. Those are questions that the EEOC views as potential medical questions, not simply asking whether they've been vaccinated. Same thing with documentation. We can absolutely ask that an employee provide documentation. That's not viewed as asking medical information. The only caveat there we would say is make sure if they're not showing their vaccine card, if they're showing something from their doctor, make sure you tell them that, hey, when your doctor completes this, make sure they're not putting any additional medical information on there that could potentially be medical in nature. We don't need to know that. We just need to know whether or not you've been vaccinated.
And also, as far as any health-related information, be mindful that it has to be kept confidential. That is the kind of stuff that maybe the individual HR person with the employee talk about, but then, ensuring that that's not information that goes out and is public for everybody to know.
So then the next question is, we can ask whether they've been vaccinated and we can request documentation, but what if we don't want to do that? What if we want to go on the honor system? What do you think about that, Carlos?
Well, the issues that you have is I think that once you get into, whether you want to have, vaccinations or not, you're getting into those questions. It's going to be very difficult for you to show, the type of information, whether they are or are not vaccinated. And if you're looking at, dealing with specific issues of the employees that are there, what potential claims may be made. If you do not have the documentation, then certainly that creates an issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think the honor system I think employers should go a little bit further than the honor system, but again, this is an individual decision. There really isn't any guidance on what's right or what's wrong or what puts you at more risk. I think if you go on the honor system, there's definitely, especially for the employees within the workplace, there's more risk there. If we go to a broader sense, if we went to the city of Chicago and you wanted to use that vaccine exemption, I think it would be very strong argument to say that you cannot go on the honor system because it specifically requires verification, and you also then have to track and can have records of the verification in case the city of Chicago's public health department decides to come in and audit you. They're going to come in. They're number one going to ask you for proof that you've been verifying. Number two, they're going to ask to go around and talk to all your customers and ask for verification. I kind of equate it to, it's kind of like a bar. If you have a 21 and over bar and suddenly the police want to come in and check for somebody who's underage, they got the ability to ask and confirm that you're checking at the front door. And then when they come in, they have the right to go around and ask people if to have their break out their ID and show that they're really 21. So if you don't do that, if you don't do a good job or don't verify, is there a potential risk of you getting some sort of fine from the city of Chicago? Yes. But now if we're talking outside of the city of Chicago, there's not that same requirement. So you can do it without having that. But is there still a risk? Absolutely, in my mind, that there's still a risk, because if we go back, we've got that Naperville example of OSHA finding them, a little over 12 grand because they had a breakout. And that doesn't even address what other claims they're dealing with, because essentially, in my view, they've got 12 grand in fines to OSHA. They've now got to do a remediation, and they probably have 23 work comp claims as well. Not to mention one in which an individual passed away.
And that's why it's critical that you kind of stay on top of what your local area might be requiring, whether it might be a county requirement, it might be any kind of requirement. You have to be aware. Certainly, we've talked about Chicago because it does illustrate the kinds of regulations they're putting into place. But depending on where you are, you need to make sure that you stay on top of those to minimize any kind of risk having to do with those, with those potential issues and how you might be enforcing or not enforcing a policy.
Yeah, and so then the other part to this is we've all been focused and seen news on the face mask issue. But what about the other aspects, social distancing, 6 feet apart, and, in fact, it is something that those are relaxed as well. So social distancing, I would say we need to stay on top of our messaging in terms of hygiene, hand washing, all of that. But we can manage, we can make changes when it comes to masks as well as social distancing. And talking with the city of Chicago on listening on their information on this, they said, listen, you can have a room set up, and this was specific to restaurants. They said you can have a room set up for fully vaccinated customers, and you can have a room for unvaccinated or mixed vaccinated and fully vaccinated customers. They said you can apply that same thing to the business. So if you've got a business and you've got 2 separate rooms, you can have it set up so one is complying with social distancing and masks, whereas one section isn't. I think it gets complicated, especially in moving employees around, especially if they've got designated workstations. But it is something that you have that possibility of doing. So you want to make sure, again, on all of these, communicating, managing how you're doing it. Because if we're a business who have kept everybody working remotely, and we start bringing them back all at the same time, if they're not all fully vaccinated, you're gonna have to look at, okay, who needs to be 6 feet apart from who, and that could be a case-by-case basis with those employees.
And and that's where the training is going to be important, right? To the extent that you look to implement any type of policy that's unique to your place of business, it is essential that that policy is communicated to your employees so that they know what the expectation is. They know for themselves if they want to make sure that they continue to wear a mask anyway. If not, whatever the case, it is critical to educate them as to what the policy is, so that no one is sitting or standing in around wondering what to do, or if it's a customer-facing type of business, when the customers come in, what do you do? What if you're an employee? What is the expectation? What are you supposed to do? And obviously the policies might go beyond just the basics of it. Then you might also have to deal with other issues. What happens if you get an unruly customer? That's where training becomes critical. So, and it will, again, depend on your location, where you are, what policies and what, the authorities may be enforcing in your area.
Yeah. And I know there's been a lot of questions on that, and it's interesting to see a state-by-state difference. I know, for example, before this all occurred in Indiana, the state legislature passed a law that took the decision on mask mandates away from the local health departments and instead put it with the local officials to vote on. In that situation, Indianapolis, the council for that county decided, or the board for that county voted to maintain the mask mandate. I can tell you that I'm sure there's a number of other counties in Indiana who have gone the other way. And also, you look at Texas. Texas, they passed I think an executive order that removed the mask mandates from all public buildings and schools. And in fact, they went the other way and said that we're prohibiting masks. And so there's been a lot of changes. In fact, there's been states who are saying, hey, listen, you cannot ask whether somebody has been vaccinated or not. I believe that one of those is Arizona. So it's very, very local, state driven on these issues at this point. We haven't gotten guidance from the federal government. And I think things are changing rather quickly for that. In fact, two stores that I've been to over the weekend, Home Depot, and then I actually went to Target just recently this morning. Neither one of them had their mask mandate signs up. And if you go in, there are people walking around without masks. So it's definitely something that, this message has come out. I think, when you go in there, there's a difference between how you treat your customers, clients, visitors coming in. If you've got a huge retail store, I think it's probably going to be more acceptable at this point to not question customers and clients coming in. If you've got a smaller office, can you still do it? I think you can. But that's for the customers. On the employee side, I think there's more risk, especially at a high retail or service industry, if you're not having employees wear masks. I think there's a higher risk there, but is it a risk that if you're comfortable managing, can you do? Absolutely. But it is something you want to look at. Okay, so maybe you'll maintain the masks, but you're going to take down any barriers that you have up between customers and employees. So there's definitely a lot of kind of options on how you manage these things.
The thing that's kind of one of the questions that I see and I noted here has to do with, can you post a list of the folks that have been vaccinated and any concerns that come from that? And I would say, again, when we talk about, asking the question, have you been vaccinated? Are you going to be vaccinated? That's more of a management type question for your folks that handle the, HR folks. Asking the question for purposes of planning, for purposes of how you are going to manage your facility. The problem with any kind of posting of this information is that we all get tribal, right? We all get, those people who are anti-maskers or who are, the other way around. You might create some conflicts within your business, within your facility. So I would not go that way. Is it a HIPAA violation? Certainly, it is. Again, the question is not necessarily asking health information, but it might still lead there. So listing individuals who have been vaccinated certainly leads to potential confidential issues, and it also could increase the likelihood that you're going to have some conflict within the workplace. And I don't know that anybody would want that to be the case. You don't want to chastise those folks. You don't want to have the star-bellied sneeches out in the open kind of thing, saying you are, or having a scarlet letter, saying you are vaccinated, you are not. That's not where you want to go with this. You want to manage it in a way that makes sense. Whatever your policy that you choose to go with, certainly something that can be enforced and can be implemented in a way that you are not getting into other issues. You are not getting into the unequal treatment. You are not getting into potential, OSHA violations or retaliation or any kind of issue. Sensitive area, of course, and that's something that we need to, keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as you've kind of heard us talk about, there's, no real clear requirements right now from the CDC and OSHA. What I would say is look to state and local. And once OSHA comes out, you know, you can make those changes. In my mind, you know, is it prudent, is it conservative to wait until OSHA comes out with additional guidance? I think so. Does that mean you have to? No. I think sometimes our operations, we're going to have to continue to go forward. In fact, one question was asked is, you know, do we have any timeline on OSHA issuing any guidance? And we don't. We really don't. I mean, I would say it's the same thing with vaccination policies. We've been asking the EEOC and Department of Labor for guidance on mandatory vaccination policies and incentive programs and what type of incentives we can provide. And if you've waited, you probably haven't done one yet because there hasn't been any additional guidance there. Overall, you know, the two big things on this is going to be communication with both employees and customers, having the signage. In fact, if you're in the city of Chicago, they have different signs for saying we're mask free if you've been vaccinated, or we still require face masks. So they have different ones depending on which one you want to do. If you haven't done it already, you know, training on any changes that you're going to be made, how to address different circumstances, you know, in particular, de-escalating any conflict. If you see two people getting into it, one without a mask and one with a mask, you can guess what the issue may be. Same thing, ADA, religious requests. When we get into that realm with customers and clients, you know, how are we going to handle it? And then you heard Carlos talk about it before, the videos. Understand that there is, with cell phones, there's a likelihood of videos, recordings, news story requests, and that's just going to be, you know, part of the public eye looking at it. And so we want to be careful not to become a viral video in there. I'm looking at some of our questions now. And one question is, what if some employee chooses not to get vaccinated? You know, how do we handle that in terms of enforcing a face mask policy? Well, if an employee is unvaccinated, yes, we absolutely can enforce our face mask policy. In fact, the only guidance I would argue that under the CDC and OSHA's guidance right now, that we're required to make that unvaccinated employee wear their face mask, because under the guidance, their guidance is only for fully vaccinated. And, you know, I have to look at this from the federal stance of why they did this. And the only thing I can really think of is they did this to try to encourage more people to get vaccinated, saying, hey, if you get vaccinated, you can do these additional things. I don't think it was done in the right way. I think it's problematic and puts a lot of the trouble that this creates by not providing guidance on businesses and employers. I don't think that's fair. But it is something we've got to deal with. And so if somebody is unvaccinated, we still have to follow the guidance that OSHA and CDC has, and we would need to require them to wear masks. We would need to require them to comply with social distancing. Likewise, if there's an exposure, we would have to still continue to treat them the same as we have over the previously.
So, you know, it's possible that at some point in time you were asking employees just a straight up question, you know, who's going to be vaccinated, just say yes or no. And you may have conducted that sort of survey, you know, and assuming that your employees answered and provided you with their position on it, you know, obviously, again, confidential position on that. But then you at least might have some idea as to who is and who isn't vaccinated, so that when it comes to enforcing the mask mandate for those that are still not vaccinated, you know who you're talking about. And it doesn't, and again, it doesn't have to be the kind of situation where you publicly tell that individual, you confront them, you or her, and try to, you know, get the mask on type of thing. You know, need to be always, just like with anything having to do with, you know, enforcement of policies, to make sure that you are doing it in a way that you're not going to ridicule the individual or humiliate the individual because of issues. And, you know, that kind of situation is what could potentially lead to internal complaints. So it's critical that the enforcement, of course, be handled in a fair manner. Even if you choose to have the rule that you have to mask up if you're not vaccinated.
So I think we'll go over a few of these questions, but we're about 15 minutes past our time. But just to keep going through some of these, have you heard of states issuing fines if companies choose to continue a mask mandate for their employees? I have not heard of any states issuing fines for continuing a mask mandate. I've seen comments, and I think that's all relatively new. I think it would be interesting to see, but is it a possibility? It depends on the state and depends on specifically what they put out there with regards to a mask mandate. Next question is, who enforces the governor's executive order? You want to comment on that, Carlos?
Well, you're looking at the Department of Public Health, to the extent that they are going to, do any type of enforcement, and that sort of trickles down to the local health departments, and how that's done. Of course, do they have the resources to be checking on everybody? Potentially not, but do you want to be the one business that happens to be checked on? So those are the issues. Again, I think that if you are acting in good faith and looking to comply with what the policies are, what the executive orders are, then you can do that. But that's up to you. That's your unique business situation, how you comply, so long as you're making that good faith effort.
So we've got two questions we're going to kind of move together here. One is, isn't asking proof of vaccination a privacy violation? Absolutely not. EEOC has said that we can do that. You hear a lot of comments about, oh, that's HIPAA protected that's HIPAA protected information. It certainly is confidential information. It's something we don't want, medical confidential information that we don't want advertising around. But it's not something that is a violation of HIPAA to ask for. In fact, HIPAA only really covers medical, companies who are involved with, like, hospitals or medically involved in dealing with medical information. So a private entity who's not in the medical field asking for confirmation is allowed. It's not a privacy violation. Again, going back there, though, if an employee refuses to answer, do we have to force them to answer? No, we don't have to force them to answer, but what we would do is treat them as if they answered in a negative and require them to continue to comply with a face mask policy. Yeah.
I was just going to say the yes or no questions appropriate is the follow-up that you need to keep an eye on and try to refrain from getting into, because again it gets into the ADA issues, potential health-related information that you don't want to go into.
Yeah, and so following up on that question, I got another one. Within the city of Chicago, restaurants can ask to see proof of vaccination. Absolutely, you can. In fact, the guidance and the FAQs from the city of Chicago specifically state that if you want to use the vaccine exemption that allows you to have more broader rights within allowing people to move around and not wear masks and all that, you have to. You're required to ask for verification and proof of it. It doesn't state what verification or proof you have to ask for, and they've kind of left that on a case-by-case basis to a business to decide, but it is something where you do have to verify it in some way. And I think that's part of recognition that there's no specific way right now to show that, absent, if you kept your vaccine card, you've got a note from your doctor, so there you have to be careful. I think it's very much going to be similar to is it a fake ID or isn't it? I would err almost on saying, hey, I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you whether that's fake or not, but I can tell you it looks like it's from a physician or that's a valid vaccine card.
Now, there are a number of questions, and certainly we won't be able to get to them on this conference call, a webcast, but, we will take the questions and then we'll do our best to answer them in whether it's a combined form or not. The ones that are or common questions or questions that kind of seem to overlap. We will do our best to address those questions, and those will go back to you, at some point in time if you've signed up, if you're on the list, and have, you're going to get the slides as well. But I think that as far as the time is concerned, we want to make sure that we respect your time. We will, conclude the discussion, and we appreciate you, participating in it, asking all those questions that you ask. It certainly helps us to know, how to help our clients and you as well. So we will go ahead and conclude the program, and we appreciate it. To the extent that you have any questions, you want to follow up with us, the information for Mike is right on the screen, as well as mine. We thank you all for your participation and attendance this afternoon. Mike?
Yep, no, that's it. We have a long list of questions, so me and Carlos will work on putting together answers to those and sending them out. We appreciate you joining. We know this is a difficult subject. We know there's a lot of different views on it. We know that there's a lot of questions. And trust us, we are there with you, and we want to get you the answers that can best allow you to make the decision that's for your company, that allows you to avoid any or limit your risks and move forward effectively. So thank you for joining us today, and we will get back to you on these questions.
Thank you.